Привіт! Це подкаст «Коли все має значення». Мене звати Ангеліна Карякіна, а зі мною тут фізично
Наталка Гунік.
Привіт, Наталко. Класно тебе іноді фізично бачити. Ти нещодавно знову повернулась з такого турне. Ключовою країною цієї поїздки стала Фінляндія, де ти була на заході дебати про Європу. Це такий інтелектуальний захід, на якому там я свого часу була в Белфасті. І це така спільнота європейських інтелектуалів. Вони багато роздумують, пишуть, публікуються щодо, скажімо, змін, які так відбуваються з демократичними суспільствами, з Європою. І от ти на цьому заході була цього разу в Хельсінкі, Фінляндії, і звідти привезла нам чудову, цікаву гостя. Хто це? Розкажи.
Це Gunvor Kronman, виконавча директорка такого закладу, який називається Hanaholmen, що по-своєму пояснюється як місце зустрічі між Швецією і Фінляндією. Це щось середнє між конгрес-холом, центром проведення конференцій, який розташований на маленькому острівці на околиці Гельсінкі. Це місце було засноване рівно 50 років тому, приблизно тоді саме, коли були обговорення Гельсінських угод, які, власне, завершилися створенням такої організації, як ОБСЄ. Цього року дебати про Європу стосувалися, власне, 50-літтю Гельсінських угод, і з такою думкою, чи воно ще варте того, чи вони працюють, чи є сенс, скажімо, все зламати і забути, і будувати нове, чи зберігати усталений порядок.
В тебе вийшов дуже важливий текст у фінській газеті, і ми також його надрукували українською мовою, власне, про те, що робити з такими інституціями, як ОБСЄ, але представ нам свою гостю.
Отож, Gunvor Kronman є виконавчою директоркою цього закладу Hanaholmen, місця, де упродовж 50 років шведи і фіни збираються на різні конференції і заходи щодо безпеки. Хоча тоді, в часи Холодної війни, це називалося культурним центром. Такого порозуміння між Швецією і Фінляндією, країнами, які були багато років в різних відносинах, були однією країною, потім окремими країнами. Але насправді це було питання про безпеку, і впродовж останніх 5 років там фактично проводяться тренінги і навчання представників цивільної оборони Швеції і Фінляндії, де фіни передають шведам свої знання щодо цивільної оборони, щодо цивільного захисту. Всі не військові, але, можливо, пов'язані з будь-якими загрозами, в тому числі воєнною безпековою загрозою, заходи. Тобто це можуть бути представники портів, лісництв, якихось інших галузей, люди пов'язані з системою безпеки, які займаються всім, від того, як убезпечити бомбосховища, до мереж мобільних операторів. Обидві країни мають дуже різну історію після Другої світової війни. Фінляндія зберігла принцип тотальної війни. Тобто це називається, що вони завжди були готові до тотальної війни. Вони з одного боку зберігали армію, призов і, скажімо, всю систему цивільної оборони, яка, можливо, в чомусь може нам нагадати, вона була іншою, але нагадати так, як до цього ставився Радянський Союз. Запаси їжі, тренування населення, стратегічні галузі, стратегічні компанії, те, що не може держава віддавати. Швеція не готувалася ніколи до війни. В Швеції не було війни століттями. У Фінляндії була війна з Радянським Союзом, так, в середині ХХ століття. І що ще сталося? Після падіння Радянського Союзу шведи, скажімо так, розслабилися. Вони зрозуміли, що, може, і нам не треба мати цю армію, тому що в Швеції армія зберігалася і призов, але вони фактично змінили армію на контрактну і, скажімо, певні безпекові речі позбулися них. І вони все-таки працювали за такою принциповою стандартною європейською моделлю ринкової економіки. Так, не члени НАТО, але й не готуємося до війни. Після російського вторгнення в Україну в 2014-му, коли війна повернулася в Європу знову, але й так само під час ковіду, вони зрозуміли, що треба. І фактично завдяки таким модулям, симуляціям, навчанню, які відбуваються з ініціативи цієї інституції Hanaholmen, по суті, це, скажімо так, острівок розміром з готель, да, оточений там водою, вони там збираються, щоб робити різні симуляції, і завдяки цьому, скажімо, шведи розуміють, як знову повернутися до посилення своєї цивільної оборони, а фіни випробовують, де в них є прогалини. Тому моя розмова з Гунвор, зокрема, по-перше, про те, як взагалі виникла така ініціатива, вчити іншу країну принципам цивільної оборони, що це за навчання, як цьому вчити, але загалом фінським практикам. Що таке фінські практики цивільної оборони? Зі збереженням бомбосховищ, що має мати родина, як працює галузь, як робиться так, що представники і CEO ключових компаній, стратегічних, там, виявляється, обов'язково проходять курси симуляції, які могли би статися в умовах війни, критичних якихось загроз. Я нагадаю, що кордон Фінляндії з Росією конкретно довший за кордон України з Росією. Цей кордон дуже довгий через ліси, через північ, через Лапландію. Є чого боятися і від чого захищатися.
Це надзвичайно цікаво. Я скажу, що в мене пару років тому, вже після повномасштабного вторгнення, була розмова з одним з працівників, які відповідають за безпеку одного зі стратегічних підприємств Фінляндії, і він мене якраз розпитував про певні практики українські, і от змусило мене усміхнутися по-хорошому. Він каже, от дивись, у нас тут є таке одне ядерне бомбосховище, а ми от думаємо, може нам мало, і нам треба ще одне вирити, і от треба між ними організувати логістику і так далі. От як ти думаєш, чи є сенс нам скільки ще рити цих ядерних бомбосховищ? І я подумала, ого, це підхід. Ми почали певні кроки вже втілювати після повномасштабного вторгнення, але фіни до цього дійсно надзвичайно серйозно ставляться. У мене в зв'язку з цим є питання через цей підхід про різний вайб в цих суспільствах. Я не знаю, чи ви говорили про це з Гунвор, наскільки той факт, що країна живе десятки років в готовності до великої війни або до безпеки, змінює їхній підхід. Ми знаємо, що шведи, вони не те, що розслаблені, але в принципі в них був інший підхід до ковіду і ізоляції і так далі. Але в принципі, наскільки фіни через це інакше живуть, якщо можна так сформулювати?
Так, у Швеції війни не було сотні років, а в Фінляндії вона була, і покоління, яке зараз доросле, все-таки має когось в родині, хто постраждав від війни, в кого або хтось воював, або в когось були переселенці. Тобто все в родині, яких там виселили з Карелії, або це були якісь там діти, які були відправлені в Швецію на якийсь там час для безпеки і теж там загубили свої родини. Тобто є травматичний досвід, і люди ставляться до війни як реальності. Я не буду, дійсно, в цьому випадку спойлерити всю розмову, тому що ми саме про це говоримо, але дійсно наголошу на цих речах, що Гунвор змусило ініціювати ці такі курси. Вона сказала, що вона була шокована тим, коли вона зрозуміла під час ковіду, як два найближчих країни, які в дуже дружніх відносинах знаходяться, дуже пов'язані з одним, і фіни дуже приязно ставилися до Швеції завжди. Це була західна країна, яка завжди допомагала, вони більше мали, завжди на них впливав цей Радянський Союз. Вони дивилися трошки на шведів знизу вгору, але з позитивом. І під час ковіду, коли країни вибрали різні шляхи безпеки, шведи тоді там доволі радикальними були, ніяких карантинів, нічого іншого. У фінів була зовсім інша практика. Почалися якісь погані відносини між країнами, коли там фінські газети жартували над шведами, казали, що це відповідально. І вона сказала, що вона була нажахана тим, як упродовж дуже короткого часу два дуже близьких суспільства можуть раптом розійтися. І чому потрібно цей особистий контакт і симуляція. А друге, що цілком дуже мені, звісно, зрезонувало, і вона теж на цьому постійно наголошувала, казала, що, знаєте, ми зрозуміли, як фіни, в нас є таке розуміння, що партнери, друзі, всі є, але зрештою ти залишаєшся сам на сам. Ти сам по собі. І ти маєш мати змогу сам себе забезпечити. Що я хотіла сказати, чому мені стала дуже цікавою їхня фундація, зокрема. В деяких випадках я думала, що ми, українці, такі вже знавці, які можуть всьому світу розказувати, як бути резистентними, як організовувати. Але я зрозуміла, що дуже багато речей, які в нас виникли ситуативно, там, дві мобільні компанії операторів, не знаю, Київстар і Водафон, вирішили, що вони працюватимуть разом і ремонтуватимуть електромережі одне одної. Тобто це класно, але це якась ситуативна річ, а виявляється, в Фінляндії це вчаться, це існує, і що би я хотіла. Як нам зробити так, щоб наш дуже ситуативний досвід, який виник в умовах екстремальних, був збережений для звичайного життя? Як зробити так, щоб в нас не було прірви між екстремальною ситуацією загострення війни, а потім ми ніби все забули? Щоб той досвід, який в нас виник ситуативно, став досвідом для убезпечення майбутніх загроз і став частиною загальних практик.
Нам є з чим порівняти і в різних частинах країни, і з різними часами від 2014 року, тому що це не стало частиною якоїсь інституційної історії. Не стало. Хтось знає, хтось розуміє, хтось не знає, хтось навіть, я знаю, де працівники дуже формально ставляться до цих речей. Дуже.
Тому мені здалося, що це не змагання, хто знає краще, як українці чи фіни, бути, в цивільній обороні, чий досвід кращий. Їхній інституціалізований і працює наш класний, героїчний, але ситуативний, який може бути не збережений потім. І мені здається, те, чого, я сподіваюся, ті, хто послухають цю розмову, можуть думати, як ми можемо далі включити це в частину не фінський, а наш досвід, наш власний, включити в якусь таку систему, про яку говорить Гунвор, коли вона говорить про Фінляндію, зокрема, щодо цивільної оборони.
Окей, давай тепер кілька хвилин все-таки присвятимо твоїй статті, тому що ми постійно і зрозуміло чому чуємо розмови про те, що міжнародні інституції, організації не працюють, не виконують свої місії від таких організацій, як ОБСЄ, ООН і так далі, до Червоного Хреста, але твоя стаття на дуже конкретному прикладі пояснює, чому маленька дія все-таки краще, ніж ніяка дія. Розкажи, будь ласка, на якому кейсі ОБСЄ ти вирішила зосередитися і чому?
На цих дебатах я мала виступати на дискусії, яка якось так і називалася, що за майбутнє міжнародного порядку, чи варто його зберігати, щось таке. Там була радниця генерального секретаря стратегічних питань ОБСЄ і так само друга людина в команді у уряді Фінляндії, яка відповідальна за головування Фінляндії в ОБСЄ. При всій критиці, яка є до цієї організації, зрозумілі, яка існує в Україні, я обрала цю можливість нагадати про дуже конкретний випадок 3 громадян України – Максима Петрова, Дмитра Шабанова і Вадима Голда, які після 2014 року долучилися до спостережної місії ОБСЄ на окупованих територіях. 2 з них жили в Луганську, 1 в Донецьку, і вони були сертифікованими співробітниками цієї спостережної місії, яка працювала до буквально 24 лютого 2022 року, коли ОБСЄ в дуже важливий момент вивела свій склад, пояснюючи це питаннями безпеки. Чоловіки ці зберігали свою дипломатичну недоторканність, вони все-таки були співробітниками цієї структури. ОБСЄ заявила, що вони евакуювали своїх співробітників, але ці чоловіки залишилися, і в квітні 22-го року їх затримали, звинуватили в тому, що вони там працюють на ЦРУ, є шпигунами, з всіма цими квазі-судами, а взимку цього року російське законодавство було вже так унормоване, що рішення, ухвалені так званими ЛНР і так званими ДНР, стали рішеннями Російської Федерації, їх взагалі перевели далеко до Сибіру. ОБСЄ і всі міжнародні організації говорять, що вони намагаються витягнути цих людей з російського, скажімо, полону, ув'язнення, і кажуть, що роблять все можливе, але просування немає. Стан здоров'я у цих чоловіків поганий, те, що ми знаємо. І моя колонка, і виступ, і потім окрема зустріч з представниками фінської влади була про одне. Так, ми можемо говорити дуже довго про зміну порядку, як створювати нові правила безпеки і все таке, але поки ОБСЄ не витягне своїх людей з російського полону, про що ми можемо говорити? І цікаво, що коли я була на Заході, який модерувала ця радниця Генсека, вона казала, да, ви говорите про деталі. Я з нею сперечалася, казала, я не говорю про увагу деталі. Я казала про те, це впровадження того, що написано у ваших статутах. Це не те, що ми маємо звертати увагу на деталі війни. Ні, це означає, чи те, що прописано, працює. І тому Якщо ви хочете хоч якось думати взагалі про участь якоїсь спостережної місії, про повернення, от зараз є таке тло, коли хтось там говорить про якихось спостерігачів в умовах якогось іншого замороження, конфлікту, як би ти це називав. Поки ви цих людей не звільните, хто буде довіряти вашій інституції? Чого йти працювати в цю місію, якщо організація не здатна звільнити своїх же людей? Навіть якщо вона використовує якісь аргументи, мене запевнили усіляко, що робота ведеться, що вона пріоритетна. Тобто це не те, що воно було для них сюрпризом. В цьому була моя, якби, скажімо, позиція, наголосити і сказати про такий навіть не подвійний стандарт. З іншого боку, якщо вже відповідати на питання, ця стаття є зараз і на порталі «Життя війни», на нашому сайті українською мовою. Я все ж вважаю, що якщо немає нічого, то існує просто вакуум. І приклад руйнування таких організацій, як USAID, наприклад, показав, що зруйнувати зараз дуже легко те, що існує. Тому питання не в тому, щоб зруйнувати все і побудувати наново, а все-таки в ситуації, коли з'явилися сили, які дуже раді зруйнувати і ООН, і ОБСЄ, і позбутися будь-якихось натяків на попередній порядок і буквально повернутися там до Ялти під час 45-го, то краще вже зберегти і змусити працювати, але працювати на конкретних деталях.
Тобто ти кажеш про те, що окей, якщо там ви глобально не можете зупинити війну, ви глобально не можете забезпечити безпеку, принаймні витягніть своїх людей з тюрми. Давайте з чогось конкретного починати, де щось таки може працювати і має працювати.
Так, а ще одна річ, я хочу звернути увагу в такій дуже довгій нашому розповіді до моєї розмови з Gunvor Kronman. Останні 10-15 хвилин нашої розмови, вони про Палестину. Gunvor дуже багато працювала в різних конфліктах, війнах, гуманітарних, в Червоному Хресті. І вона якби надзвичайно переймається тим, що там відбувається. Зокрема, зараз там є голод, штучний голод в Газі. Її чоловік є палестинцем. Він з доволі привілейованого бекграунду. Вона регулярно буває на західному березі. Це інша частина Палестини, і я питала її буквально, в чому особливість. От поясніть там тим, хто, можливо, до кінця не розуміє, чому ми абсолютно можемо говорити, що те, що зараз відбувається в Газі, є найгіршим. Вона дає цьому дуже чітке пояснення, порівняно з усіма іншими геноцидами, питаннями, складними ситуаціями, трагічними. Але мені було дуже цікаво, під час наших розмов я зверну увагу, що і під час подкасту, але більше під час нашого приватного спілкування, коли я наводила будь-який приклад української стійкості, вона завжди казала, це як в Палестині, це як в Палестині. Тому, звісно, я попросила її про це, по-перше, роз'яснити і пояснити, але, по-друге, скажу, цікаво, що це була постійно така розмова, коли я її питала про Фінляндію, згадувала приклад України, але вона розказувала, що але в палестинців є все одно куди креативніший спосіб, бо в них немає нічого, ні держави, яка їх захищає, ні якогось такого суспільства. Мені здається, це дуже важливо нам так само, українцям, продовжувати про це говорити.
Така розмова вийшла з 3 боків, якщо не 4, дуже незвичайна перспектива. У нас дійсно вийшов супер довгий з тобою така розмова, підводка до твоєї розмови, але є і було про що поговорити. Я сподіваюся, вона була цікава нашим слухачам, слухачкам. Ну що, давайте нарешті слухати розмову Наталки з Gunvor Kronman.
Я хочу подякувати тим слухачам і слухачкам, які вже присилають нам підтримку. Наша бухгалтерія повідомляє, коли прийшли певні суми, і страшенно вдячні за це. Я нагадаю, що наш подкаст «Коли все має значення» не має якогось окремого фінансування. Ми його робимо з власної ініціативи і хочемо, щоб цю роботу підтримували, особливо заради нашої команди, чудової редакторки Іри Лопатіної і звукорежисерки Люби Гук. Якщо у вас є така можливість, будь ласка, є реквізити, вони є і на нашому сайті лабораторії журналістики суспільного інтересу, і там, де це можливо, на тих платформах, можливо, ви можете прочитати, як ці реквізити знайти, а ми працюємо над тим, щоб мати зручніший спосіб цієї сталої підтримки. Це не просто дуже приємно, це дуже надихає, спонукає до подальшої роботи, але дійсно є все-таки вагомим внеском. Тому дуже-дуже вдячні.
Дякуємо вам за ту підтримку, яку ви нам надаєте. Насправді для нас важить навіть найменша сума. Це дуже важливо для нашої команди, яка професійно працює з нашим подкастом і дає нам можливість і далі спілкуватися і шукати найкращих, найцікавіших гостей, яких ви з меншою долею вірогідності ще десь можете почути, послухати, почитати, яких ми спеціально для вас з Наталкою відбираємо з усього світу буквально. Тому ми будемо вам дуже вдячні за посильний для вас донат на підтримку подкасту «Коли все має значення» нашої невеличкої команди. Ви зможете знайти реквізити на сайті Лабораторії журналістики суспільного інтересу, а також на платформах, де є доступним наш подкаст, а це майже всі подкастингові платформи, які є доступними в Україні. Дуже вам дякую, почуємося.
It's kind of a luck for me to meet exactly the right person in the place I am. But Gunvor, I want first you to explain what is the place we are, what makes it special, because it's very unusual.
I've been the CEO here for 22 years. I never come across exactly this same concept. This is a place for dialogue, interaction between two neighboring countries, Finland and Sweden, that actually used to be one country for almost 800 years, but then were separated by Sweden losing the war to Russia and having to give Finland away to Russia. That's how we became part of the Russian Empire for 100 years. We have a very broad mandate to deepen the relationship, to build bridges, to develop the society, but also, especially during the Cold War, this was a window to the West for Finland to be able to breathe, to have discussions that were politically not possible because of the friendship agreement that was signed with the Soviet Union.
But how this also premise, Congress Center, whatever you call it, Cultural Center, has been built? There is also a story behind that.
So Sweden lended Finland considerable amount of money as part of the peace agreement that Finland had with the Soviet Union. And Finland had to pay for the war, so Sweden helped with that. And in order to regulate that debt later on, when Finland turned 50 as an independent nation, Sweden first proposed that they would forgive the loan. That was not possible to accept because there most likely would have been punishment from the Soviet Union for Finland receiving this as a gift. So one came up with the idea of creating this place for deepening the dialogue between Finland and Sweden, to call it a cultural center, but define the mandate very broadly so you could actually discuss and negotiate whatever was important for Finland and Sweden at that time. And very symbolically, security policy was the first discussion that took place here. And ever since, that's been one of the red threads in our center.
Yet something happened after the COVID with your ideas on why it should be crucial for the civil defense, wherever you name it. So maybe you'll explain.
Well, actually what happened was that two countries that claim to be the best neighbors in the world, as we used to say, both in Finland and Sweden, suddenly, due to very different strategies to deal with the COVID pandemic in these countries, the relationship kind of broke down. And I was really shocked to see that even two countries that are so close, so similar, and have so many individual personal links between them, that the atmosphere in a neighbor relationship can change just so suddenly. And it started, of course, with disagreeing on the strategies on COVID, but it very quickly spread to other areas of society as well. And suddenly you had headlines in main newspapers, especially in Finland, where everything was bad in Sweden. Nothing was good. And if you saw a car with Swedish number plates on, people could become quite aggressive. And Swedes, of course, felt that they were mocked and not understood by Finns. And then, of course, the physical closing of borders didn't improve the situation because since we've been living in an almost borderless reality, that was quite a difficult situation for many individuals who had work and family life and everything on both sides of the border. So that's where this center, whose main task is to actually take care of this relationship between the two best neighbors in the world, we decided we have to come up and do something. And what we actually started to do was to look back in maybe the past 20, 30 years when different kind of crises had hit, like refugee crisis in 2015, forest fires, other things. And we actually found out that cooperation doesn't work very well when an unusual situation hits. No matter what agreements, bilateral agreements you have between countries, when you get into a crisis mode, countries tend to turn inwards and make decisions unilaterally, and you don't really evaluate what the consequences of your national decisions are, even if the crisis per se is cross-border crisis. So that picture became very clear, and since we had been working with military cooperation for many years to deepen that relationship between Finland and Sweden, and one must remember that at that time we were not NATO members, so it was very important to integrate our armed forces instead. We realized that this whole area of civil defense and societal resilience, that we need to do something to improve the situation. And that's where we then started to develop a program that today is called the Hanaholmen Initiative. It's now running for the 5th year. It's a program that is cross-sectoral. It's connecting leaders within private sector, public sector and third sector. And we do scenario-based training on potential crisis situations that are a little bit defined in a different way each year, because we cooperate with, let's say, the best intelligence in both countries to try to understand what are the likely future crises that we might face. And then we come up with recommendations identifying gaps or areas where we need to improve competence, or where we need to make some legal changes in order to facilitate future cooperation. And it's been a very positive experience to realize that you can actually build societal resilience together, but you need to know each other on an individual basis. You need to, I always say that the success criteria is that when a person in a responsible position for a critical function has the mobile number of his or her colleague in the neighboring country in the mobile and feels comfortable calling that person at 3 o'clock in the morning, then we have reached our goal to actually build this trust that is necessary in order for, and also to have this automatic reaction that, okay, we have a crisis, but okay, this will also hit the neighbor, or how can we cooperate, or can they help us, okay, or should we share this information? So I think we have come a long way, and it's very interesting now that the Norwegian government actually a couple of weeks ago made a decision that they want to join this, and we also know that the Baltic states are showing interest, and we've been sharing these experiences with both NATO and membership countries in Brussels, and I think it's a good model of how you work cross-border to strengthen your society.
Would you give an example, what kind of situation can be discussed or sorted out, even if...
It's been extremely diverse, because we have 20 participants every year participating, and it's always, we try to identify pairs that are as similar as possible in terms of responsibility. So it could be, just to give you a very concrete example, in terms of securing food stocks, to have the major retail organizations agreeing on stocking and how to transport basic food items, if necessary, over the border. We had the two church organizations who signed an agreement at the end of our training on how to assist each other in terms of a potential situation of having to deal with mass graves or burying of a big number of people. We have had telecommunication companies signing agreements on how to secure each other capacity in terms of, we had the public service companies coming up with a joint strategy for how to secure that, let's say, the more likely scenario that Finnish public service can transmit independent news from the Swedish studio if Finland would be occupied, for example, and the other way around, which is maybe more unlikely than the first way. So very, very concrete, and we tried to keep it very, very practical.
Finland was the country which, during the Cold War and after the Cold War, preserved this paradigm of the total defense, which was actually looked, what I understand, a bit upon down, that, like, aren't you crazy? Everybody is demilitarizing, but you preserving the mandatory conscription, some other kind of Cold War era stock supplies, things like that. Maybe can you just a bit explain, because that's norm for you. It's a bit surprising to us, but also not that surprising because it's something we heard of in our past and something we abandoned. So, but what is this total defense idea in Finland? I'm speaking both about military, but also about your sphere.
It's, of course, rooted in a historic experience of the several wars that Finland has experienced. My own mother was a war child, as one of the 80,000 children that were sent away from Finland during the war for many, many years. I never met my grandfather because he was shot in Karelia, which was Finland at that time, but then became part of Russia, as Finland had to give up more than 10% of its territory as part of the peace agreement with Soviet Union. This is nothing abnormal. Every Finnish family has this story about losses and about repeated wars and sufferings that's been sort of transmitted to us by our grandparents and parents. At the same time, sharing 1,340 kilometers, the longest border in EU with Russia, I think even if we had a sort of a very working, I would say, an even open relationship with Russia for many years, which of course is not the case right now, that sort of deep knowledge inside has never gone away in Finland, that anything could happen any day, and you have to be prepared. And of course, the experience that we did have during the wars also, that in the end, you have to deal with it yourself. You cannot count on others to come and help you. I think that's the same attitude Finland has joined NATO. It's not that we expect others to fix it for us. That's why we have the largest army in Europe, even if we have a population of only 5.5 million people, which is not a big population. So this idea of being prepared, being able to cope with your society and run the society for months, I think what the discussion that we're carrying out now, and that's actually based on some of the Ukrainian experience, is that maybe the time span that we have prepared for is too short, looking at what has happened in Ukraine, that we do need to have a better plan for coping with an extreme situation for example, 2 years. It's not enough with 3 or 6 months. You're right that many thought we were very old-fashioned when stockpiling anything from petrol to seeds to, of course, medicine, and which all this came to use, of course, very well during COVID period. The only thing I think was that the masks were not that high quality, even if we had them in the stocks. So there were many learnings also. But I think this, and then of course the training, military has been obligatory for men in Finland ever since independence, and voluntary for women.
How long do people serve? So what is the
It's
usual?
anything between 9 and 12 months. It's not very usual not to serve in the army. There is the possibility to do civil service, which is it's not very common. And then we have, ever since the 50s, there was introduced a system of widely training a broad part of the population how to run the country in a situation of crisis. It's called the defense courses, where you are called to join either at a national level, a regional level, or municipality level, depending on your function in the society. And that's where, for example, I joined course 182 almost 20 years ago. When you are called to this course, even if you are, as these national courses for leading people in different sectors in the society, you don't question it. You don't say that, no, my listed company is now in a deep crisis. As a CEO, I cannot take part in the course. You go and you stay for a month or for a month and a half, and you stay there. And then you do rehearsals. This is creating a glue that is cross-sectoral also.
What is this? You know, so maybe you can a bit describe. So these kind of CEO leaders come, and what do you do for the months? Who are this type of people? Maybe something from your experience.
You know, it's CEO for private companies. It's leading bureaucrats from ministries and different official institutions. It's people from public-private, as myself. It's politicians. It's media people. And they actually always make a point of mixing very broadly people. It's a mix of giving lectures to learn about, you know, how do you keep electricity running in a country? How do you secure that logistics function? How does the decision-making in the military function? How do you build a state budget in a crisis situation? So at the same time, you're given a role in the state, a fictional role. And we're maybe 30 people in a course, and everybody has their own role. Simultaneously, when you go through lectures like going to school actually for 8-9 hours a day, there is just a scenario playing out all the time where you get more and more information, and actually the situation becomes more and more complicated all the time. And you are forced to deal with this developing catastrophe or emergency situation at the same time as you receive the training. It's very educational in terms of you learn about yourself, how you function under that kind of pressure, how able you are to reach decisions and to be rational. And of course also you learn about the subjects itself, but it's an extremely interesting way of being trained.
What was your role? Would you tell? Like, what were you?
Well, I was in the rescue service. Okay. Because I've been working in Red Cross previously for many years globally. So maybe that was a kind of a natural role for me, to being head of rescue service.
But there are still a lot of other kind of state practices like stockpiling, critical companies, particular stores which have to have some rules about the accepting cash. Would you tell what is still also in Finland, which you think which is so normal, but maybe especially as you said, like during the COVID, it was understood that was used?
What is really important is the cooperation between the private sector and the authorities, because the critical sort of companies are organized in a number of what they call them pools. And it can be telecommunications, it can be logistics, it can be health services, and so on, and very often with competing companies in the same pool. In these pools, processes are developed on how to deal with extreme different scenario situations together with authorities, and how can you use the capacity of for example, production and turn it into something that is needed in a crisis situation. And I think that this preparedness is extremely important in a real-life situation, that you have the trust. I think that the trust is basically the most important factor in all this, because all these different actions that are taking place in this kind of all-of-society resilience that is built is that sectors trust each other, citizens trust the authorities, the companies trust the authorities. The authorities are trusting the third sector actors, and not only trusting, but also treating them as equals and developing solutions together. And the second important thing is exercise. You need to have regular small and big scale exercises where you train together, because it's only through the training that you actually learn about what doesn't work.
So, for instance, that would be these cases which were during the pandemics, like the alcohol company can produce disinfectors and things like that. That's what is meant, yes? You also told me earlier that there is some particular rules also for like stores about some stockpiles. So what is the rule for some of the stores to have?
Basic items for livelihood. I think we have 300 of these stores now in Finland, and it's actually normal stores. It's not specific stores. It's normal stores that have agreed to stockpile in a specific way, so that a limited number of critical items are available for a longer period. And especially important is that payment is possible without digital services, so that you have the ability to receive cash payments. And then, of course, there are all these sort of general instructions given to citizens, because the role of the individual is very important in the concept of total defense. So making sure that individuals do have enough cash at home, that they do have basic food items for a certain period of time at home, that you do have water canisters, that you do have a manual radio that is working either on batteries or with solar power or something, so that communication can be maintained, and so on. Of course, it's not perfect, and of course, not every individual in Finland is having this at home, but there is a general very high awareness of this. And the interesting paradox is that, and there was a study last year done about this, about feeling safe, that actually compared to many capitals in Europe, Helsinki capital people felt more safe than many others. And I think it's related to that you feel a little bit prepared, and you feel that you know what to do, and you know that your closest shelter is there. In many countries now you don't have shelters. In Finland, there is by law shelters. When you build houses, you have to build shelters. And very typically, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the same week in the house where I live, the board of my house immediately sent out an email to all the people living in the building that they have checked the shelter, there is equipment is okay, and everything is okay. Nobody told them to do it. It was like a sort of instinct that this is what you do.
By the way, I'm quite curious, what is this kind of shelter? It's like kind of how nice it is, does it has a light, I don't know, a bathroom or something, are particular rules? Because we have a huge thing now, because we inherited part of the buildings which have the shelters, then the new buildings were not built, but those old shelters are so abandoned and ugly, and maybe for many years there was issues with sewage or something like that, so they're just unpleasant, and within a couple of years some houses rebuild them and put them in better condition, but usually they are not very nice. What is kind of a general rule? How does your shelter look like, and how you also build this tradition? So, for instance, you were brought up in the system that you have a canister, and the kid knows it. That's what you have at home. And there is a tradition, to put and, for instance, change this stockpile of grain or something, or sugar, or like every month you buy something to update it.
Well, the shelters are, because it's also by the law. In urban areas, there are big shelters provided by the municipality. And they are, of course, it's not like from any interior design magazine. It's underground places, but yes, there is toilet, there is water, there is very simple beds, like military beds, and blankets. In some of the big ones, also medical facilities. The shelter in my house, which is an ordinary building with apartments, not a very big house. It's in the basement. We have blankets, we have buckets, we have light, we have electricity, we have sand, first aid kit. But it's the basics.
How you teach your kids, or is it some reminding? Because the question is how to have this habit, because you can just have it outdated. If, of course, COVID taught you something, then the Russian invasion to Ukraine also reminded that you need to, update things. But in generally, is like any state campaign, newsletter, announcement, or the state practice or the curricula in the school. So what makes people remember that you need to have this water? And I sometimes, to be honest, forget to have it. And we have the war ongoing. And I'm like, okay, I probably need to have something now, because I'm getting used to this kind of normalization. And I already used that there is no deficit. So even during the war, I would forget if I'm not reminded.
This is a really difficult question because how do you create this culture? And I'm not sure I can answer that properly because it's not like it's being forced upon anybody. I guess it's very much, first of all, that the presence of potential war is something that exists in family story somehow. You know about it, and of course, now I'm 62, so of course. And since my parents experienced war, so I'm closer to that than my children are. And there is definitely a difference. But I must say that the war in Ukraine in Finland, it feels like it's our war. It's reminding us of everything that was maybe a little bit latent already. So it's renewing that knowledge very much. Of course, we talk about, you have this system of building the societal resilience, you have the trainings, but I'm not sure I can really answer that question properly. And I think I need to understand it myself also, because how can you export this kind of culture? Because it's not based on propaganda, it's not based on fear, it's not based on force. What you can see, the culture, I think the willingness to defend your country is something that we measure regularly. And it's very, very high in Finland. Also, amongst young people. Which means, actually, if needed, if you have to, also with weapons. There you see somehow, it's an expression of some kind of deep knowledge that there is in the population, that this is what you do for your country, this is if it's necessary.
If to return to the war, to the winter war, what was the main reason the Finland made it? How do you think? What was the reason? Because still now it comes like an example of the smaller country standing against this huge Soviet Union.
A lot had to do with this strong motivation. The high level of motivation that you were fighting for your independence. Which, of course, is a different thing than if you want to occupy. I think the willingness to sacrifice everything when you fight for your independence is there is more power in that. Of course, we knew our geography better. That probably was I'm not an expert on warfare per se, but I think this, if you then call it the morale or whatever, was a big part of it. Because then you're willing to suffer a little bit more, endure a little bit more. And of course also we were used to dealing with the climate, maybe more than at least some of the Russian army that came from maybe warmer places.
Yet Finland had to still give up part of its territory with the population. But you did something different. You took away the population.
Yes, we evacuated the whole population, which was, of course, a very painful process. And it happened very quickly also. So people they had to leave everything behind, basically.
So literally it's like 300,000 people. And what happened to them?
Well, they were placed all over the rest of the Finnish territory. The government decided that people with a certain area of land would give some of the land to these new settlers in Finland from Karelia. Or then if you had a big apartment in a city, you would give up a room or two for these families. That the government sort of way of forcing this kind of solidarity act by the whole population was very important. And of course, it probably was not easy, and I can imagine how it is that you suddenly have a new family living in your house that you don't know, and also maybe that speaks another language and so on. But it was the right thing to do, I'm sure.
Finland is now the member of NATO. How the whole kind of approach changed, but also, what it changed, how also it's seen today, the NATO membership, which was not the case before.
There was not a majority of Finns supporting a NATO membership until Russia's aggression on Ukraine. Even if we did discuss NATO membership as an option for a very, very long time, it was fascinating to see how quick a political opinion can actually change in extreme situations, because it was almost overnight that there was this huge shift to a very big majority being in favor of the NATO membership. From a Finnish point of view, it went really quickly then when the decision was made. That was, of course, that decision was made in a reality before President Trump, where there was a different understanding of Article 5 in the NATO treaty. But at the same time, I think, as I said earlier, I don't think there ever has been the illusion in Finland, even if we are NATO members, that it means that we should rest and think that somebody else will come and help us if we need.
If you speak about like civil defense and things you are working, I'm not asking about anything kind of secret, but what are the threats you like? There is this big potential threat, always like this ultimate extreme scenario of the occupation or use of the military force. But what are the scenarios you are preparing in the modern days? Because they're different, like it was in, for instance, the whole digital infrastructure creates a totally new dependency of the people, and you need to build actually resilience, how to be not dependent on electricity or internet. So what are the things you are now like thinking in the modern warfare, in the hybrid warfare? What are the things are discussed, prepared during this kind of courses, seminars, modules, whatever you do, what you're passing to your Swedish counterparts?
The hybrid threats are something that we are already living very actively, and some would even describe it as we actually are in a hybrid war situation already, because the attacks are daily. We see attacks on water facilities. We see also suspicious sort of infrastructure being built very close to the Finnish border, military capacity being moved to the Finnish border. So we're very aware of this threat. We see incidents in the Baltic Sea with different ships that are registered in faraway countries, but most likely with also links to neighboring countries, not respecting our borders. There are things happening all the time. But I think the digital sort of reality has brought many new challenges that we still have to become much more sophisticated in dealing with. And again, I think this is an area where we can learn a lot from the experiences in Ukraine. Also, when it comes, for example, to maintaining electricity functioning, Ukraine has, I think, learned a lot. That definitely is something we should look at more carefully. These are maybe the new ones. Then we have the whole area of misinformation and sort of discrediting of fact-based decision-making, which is another extremely difficult area to tackle, because it's so diversified, the whole sort of scene that you need to try to have an understanding of and manage. So there's enough to do, and I think the good thing about working together with Sweden, as we have done so intensively now the past years, where Sweden is sort of very much rebuilding the system that they had. is that when you work with a country that in a way abandoned the system and now look at what kind of civil defense do they need to build from scratch, that is a very useful experience for Finland as well, because sometimes you are too much bound in the past and in traditions. And then having a counterpart who's looking with fresh eyes on the new challenges can be very rewarding for also us in Finland. So I think this cooperation is extremely fruitful.
Gunvor, you worked for many years, and you probably would explain where you work in Rwanda, else in the various humanitarian crises globally with Red Cross. So I'll want you to speak from that experience. But the question would be very clear. You say that there is nothing like, have you ever seen like what's happening in Palestine and Gaza? It's like the worst. And I think that especially for us, Ukrainians who live kind of in the crisis and the war, you always think like, oh, but everybody keeps her crisis as the worst. And there are the others in Sudan, in Congo, elsewhere, in Myanmar, there are the fights, like there are always something. But still, why you insist, would you explain that what's happening now in Gaza is like, it's so devastating and, kind of breaks the heart in a way. What makes it so different? And also like, properly referring what is your experience to what you compare, because you've seen a lot.
Before this position, I worked 16 years with Red Cross all over the world in some of the worst crises, anything from Sudan to Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and other war situations. I think in the way Gaza is different is one must understand that Gaza, first of all, is a very small area. It's not much bigger than the municipality called Espoo, where we are sitting right now. And in that small area, you have 2.1 million people. If that is what is left there, we don't know the actual number of deaths. Crumbled into a prison-like situation. That was even before 7th of October 22. And now that there is no external ability to have international presence, international journalists have not, during the whole 19 months of war, they have not been allowed in. International aid organizations with very few limitations have not been allowed to work or to verify any of the facts that are being contested by Israel and reported by the civilians and in Gaza. At the same time, that you have a situation where there's been a blockade now for more than 2 months of absolutely no food, no medicines, no water facilities, no fuel, no nothing entering that area with 2 million people. We know that this is causing starvation. We know that starvation is causing diseases. We know that there is no hygiene possibilities. We know that basically there is no healthcare anymore available. At the same time, few kilometers from the borders of Gaza, there is all the goods needed to actually correct this situation. Goods for months, food, medicine, water, fuel, just waiting because of a political decision not to help this whole population. So this kind of collective punishment of a whole population, which is called ethnic cleansing, which is called genocide, while you have a majority of the political leaders in the West just watching this. And what we're seeing now, of course, is since yesterday when the Israeli government announced that they will actually occupy the whole of Gaza and move the population somewhere. It's not clear to anybody where this population is going to be moved. Now you have stronger language by leaders, but the language doesn't change the reality and the suffering on the ground and the increasing amount of deaths that is just growing day by day, and the killing continues. I think in this way that there is nothing, there's so little that one can do, because no help is allowed. That's the difference compared to all the other humanitarian situations I've seen where international organizations have been able to be present, press has been present reporting, maybe help has always been insufficient, but there has been things that you have been able to do. But now you just watch. You just watch the killing.
And you actually always were called to kind of like a return to what happened in October 7th, which I find like a bit strange, to be honest, that, because it's disproportionate.
But it doesn't justify what we're seeing.
Yet with my question is that Israelis sometimes saying that, that was what reminded them about the Holocaust. It was such a traumatic event. But for you who was in Israel, who kind of know the place as well, how you explain what happened to Israelis, with not just tolerating, but encouraging, so there are the ones which are tolerating, there are the ones which are encouraging, and the others who are committing what is happening. But what has happened with this society?
And let me say this, the present Israeli government is not all of Israel, and it's definitely not Jews. So I would not like to have that misunderstanding. But the present Israeli government has some very extremist elements in it, where from the very beginning of the war it was stated by 2 ministers that Palestinians are human animals and they should be evicted from the earth. Of course, this is an extreme position, but over the years that I spent in Israel and in Palestine, because I have a home there as well, is that the dehumanization of Palestinians is something that has been ongoing for a very long time. The very strong different narrative about history, about which I think it's, you can call it indoctrination or propaganda or whatever. At the same time, and it's fair to say that there are also human rights organizations in Israel. Just yesterday, there was a demonstration at the border towards Gaza by Israeli peace activists, and it was devastating to see the Israeli army just hitting them and treating them like Palestinians. Their only crime was in a peaceful demonstration to ask for peace. This is also something I see happening in Israel, that people are turning against each other. And when you normalize violence, as what has happened I remember during the Second Intifada and also later, there were very harsh condemnations from the West when a couple of Palestinians were killed. Now the new normal is that between 100 and 200 Palestinians are killed every day, and nobody says nothing. That's in the West, but also in the Israeli society, when violence is becoming part of the normal, it also starts eating the society from inside. And you, of course, also have this division within the Israeli society between the very religious communities and the secular communities with very different sort of privileges, one would say. You have the 2 million Israelis that are Arabs, that are, again, a very different part of the population, where you have close to 80 different laws discriminating them as Israeli citizens because they have Arab origin. So this kind of what I would call a deeply rooted racist society to start with, it's probably easier to take new steps towards cruelty, as we have seen now.
When I had been mentioning, like the examples of the Ukrainian resilience during the war, you were constantly kind of like referring to this resilience you see in the Palestinians. So what gives you kind of some, like not a hope, but what you're also seeing, because, like about how they are organizing their ways of life in these conditions?
Well, it's interesting because after the 7th October, I was actually in Palestine at that time. and my family is like a clan of 24 people. I immediately started to talk about, because it was clear that the situation would be bad, although nobody could imagine what actually then has happened, the total devastation of Gaza that we've seen. And actually, the same thing starts happening in the West Bank now, so that's maybe something that media is not that much attentive to. But anyway, this kind of what I would call the Finnish civil defense instinct definitely was not there. I started to make evacuation plans. Do we have mattresses? Do we have water supplies? Do we have this and that? And that was not something that existed, because I think also Palestinians are so used to anything can happen anytime, and it does happen anytime, that yet you just cope with it. So that was one part. But the Palestinian resilience that I refer to is it's really based on the social fabric. It's interesting because it's a very different way of looking at the society. For me, coming from a Nordic welfare state where state somehow creates the structure in your life, while in the absence of a strong state and in Palestine, it's really the social fabric between families and extended families and friends. Insistence of in any terrible situation, really maintaining meals together, having iftar after you break the fast together, gathering for birthdays, and continuing to insisting on normality as much as possible, even if circumstances are extreme around you. Insisting on art, on music, on reading Mahmoud Darwish poems. I really love this resilience and the deep belief that one day Palestine will be free.
What gives you strength to go on?
Well, I have a couple of things. It doesn't feel like that I have that strength every day, but during this past year, I have tried to do something beautiful every day for myself. It can be buy flowers or bake a cake very early in the morning before I go to work, just for because to do something that gives me some kind of pleasure. I love beauty, aesthetics. And the other thing is really to try to be at the right side of the history.